Welcome back in for another edition of Armchair Quarterback. I'm David Allen, joined as always by Coach Guy Suttle and Rob Root. And there we go. Each week we talk about our high school football teams in Cleveland County. We'll do a little look ahead, then we'll do some Gardner Webb and college football, and then we'll finish it up with the Carolina Panthers, 2 in a row. We'll finish up Panthers and the NFL talk as we look forward to next week. This week, it was the makeup week from the Hurricane Week. Only 2 of the teams in the county were in action as Kings Mountain and Crest both had games on Friday night. Burns and Shelby were open. So let's get started with that. And it was a Thursday night affair on Thursday night as Crest took on Stuart Kramer. This one was originally scheduled for the Hurricane Friday. It actually stayed scheduled for that. They didn't move it because Kramer had homecoming scheduled that night, but as it turned out, we couldn't have played it at any point during that week or that weekend. So played it on Thursday night, and you see early on, Coach, this one got away from Stuart Kramer right off the bat.
Yeah, and it's just going to steamroll up. We talked a little bit last week about Crest being more physical and playing a little more intense as far as cutting back on the penalties. And I'm sure Rob can allude to this a little more than I can. But the penalties were cut down tremendously. I know the game was over very early, and Kramer tried to make it a 4-down territory all the time. And that just didn't stack up well against the Crest defense.
Well, I mean, Rob, we had that coach at Presbyterian a couple of years ago, went for 2 all the time, went for onside kicks all the time, probably went on 4th down all the time too. I don't remember. And sometimes that works if you've got some decent athletes on the field, and then other times that's just asking for trouble.
Yeah, 3 times Kramer went for it on 4th down. Crest stopped him, got the ball in great field position. And you started seeing some of the changes, too, that Crest kind of put in the offense this week that we hadn't seen. Saw Jahari Mosley run out of the Wildcat on that 2-point conversion. Saw Lyric Pettis getting in on the offensive side of the ball. I think ran from the H-back position. And Mike Edwards getting some running back carries. So it's going to be interesting going forward. We knew there was going to be some changes going in, and there were definitely some on Thursday night.
Well, I mean, we didn't expect this one to be close, and it wasn't. Crest 50-7 over Stuart Kramer on Thursday night. We'll talk about what's coming up next for the playoffs for Crest, and we'll do that here in the second segment, or maybe we'll get into that here in the first segment, obviously, because if we save everything to the second segment, this will be a 5-minute segment, and we'll come back and do a 25-minute segment. Anyway,
right.
Let's talk about the Kings Mountain game. About the same difference, Rob. Kings Mountain going over to North Gaston. A little bit of, with Darrell Wilson, the former defense coordinator at Kings Mountain, now the head coach at North Gaston, and all that kind of stuff. But it's just one of those situations. Wildcats outmanned in that game, and so obviously Kings Mountain was able to dominate the football game.
Yeah, and actually when you look at these 2 games and Kings Mountain doing exactly what they need to do, when we started looking at seedings for the RPI, these 2 games actually hurt Crest and Kings Mountain. It caused them both to drop in the RPI rates because they played those 2 games. But again, I thought it was a good night for Kings Mountain to get refocused, make sure everybody's healthy, and get ready for a run in the playoffs.
Well, and Coach, you mentioned that when we were before we came on the air. You talking about Irwin gets the number 1 seed in 3A. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Without playing a game, so they ended up at 8-1 instead of 9-1. And Rob points out when you play people that are right, they don't help you. And so Kramer, the win, even though it was 50-7, and even though it was 54-7, Kings Mountain over North Gaston, both of those games actually hurt you in the long run in terms of your RPI.
Yeah, I mean, it dropped. Crest was going into that week, was going to be the number 10 because they seed all the conference champions first. And by playing that game, it dropped them to 11. I know you say 10 to 11. That's a difference. It can make a difference of what your second round game is, what the potential of your third round game is, if there's any upsets, whether or not you're at home. There's a lot of factors that go into that. But by the same token, I think Coach Lloyd was probably glad after the Kings Mountain game, losing by 1 point, to have that game or to have that preparation week and to work on things and have a different opponent on Friday night and see those come to fruition.
Yeah, absolutely. 54-7, the final in this one. Kings Mountain easily over North Gaston. And even though we said it hurt their, maybe their strength of schedule and RPI, it obviously is a good way to get ready for the playoffs. I would rather have a 54-7 game than sit at home unless I'm dealing with injuries. And,
Kings Mountain looks like one of the hottest teams going into the playoffs right now. And I know we'll talk about that more in the second segment, but, wow, Kings Mountain really poured it on North Gaston, as was expected, but they are playing at a high level right now.
Well, actually, since we're on this side of the break, Tim, if it's okay with you with the graphics and stuff, let's talk about the 3A teams. Since we just talked about Crest and Kings Mountain, let's talk about them as far as what they're going to be seeing in the first round of the playoffs. So we did see Crest go in at an 11. They're at home against Eastern Guilford. We see there Eastern Guilford at 6-4. Rob, what do we know about Eastern Guilford?
They did go on a 6-game winning streak, but when I started digging inside their schedule and teams they played, in their 4 losses, they only averaged 6 points a game. When you look at the 6 out of their conference that they won, 5 of those teams would actually be, we use the Max Preps rankings, 5 of those teams are actually ranked lower than Stuart Cramer and North Gaston. So I think not sure they've been tested. They did finish off with Dudley. That game was only 21-2, but then after you talked to the Dudley folks, Dudley rested some kids in that game going into the playoffs. So I don't know if they've really been tested, but again, it's the playoffs.
Yep.
I think, you got to give your best shot. You got to stay focused. I think Crest can get the victory, but don't go out and mess around.
Well, and one thing's for sure, Coach. I mean, this could be their only home playoff game.
Yeah.
I mean, unless there's an upset on the other side of the bracket, they're going on the road next week. So this is an opportunity for Crest in front of the home crowd to make a statement as they, look forward to going farther into the playoffs.
Yeah, and there's some history there between Crest and Eastern Guilford when they were in 4A that last time, somewhere around 2008, 2009, somewhere in that neighborhood. We had to travel, or Crest had to travel to Eastern Guilford in a playoff game. So there's a little bit of history there. Eastern Guilford, though, I just don't think has played the competition that Crest has played, and that's going to be the difference in the ball game for 4 quarters. Even though, Crest needs to make sure that they play a consistent ball game for 4 quarters.
Tim's going to throw that bracket up. There you see Crest Eastern Guilford at the bottom there. Crest Eastern Guilford winner would take on the Oak Grove North Iredell winner. That game, if it falls by the seeds, would go and be at Oak Grove. And then you see the top part of that bracket. Number 3 Hickory waiting in the 3rd round for whoever may come out of that, because you got Hickory, Tuscola, and then Statesville, Franklin. Statesville is one of those teams that Crest and Kings Mountain both have run up against over the last few years in the playoffs. Depending on what they could do with Hickory in the 2nd round, I would think that's probably going to be the best case scenario for the Chargers. They'd be going to Hickory in the 3rd round.
Statesville had Hickory beat in the regular season, and they hurt themselves with turnovers and penalties. I'm not sure Hickory's too excited about a possible 2nd round matchup, a rematch with Statesville.
Agreed, and there's some, and we'll get it to them in the 2A and 1A bracket, or the 2A bracket. Also, some interesting matchups. But by the same token, I don't think South Point's ready to go after Ashbrook in the 2nd round either.
Right.
The bottom half of that bracket, or the one that we're not seeing, has Ashbrook and South Point playing in the 2nd round, and Ashbrook has already beaten South Point. So, yeah, the brackets are pretty interesting. Again, I don't think Hickory, the only, with Statesville is the familiarity so soon after you've already played them. It would be different, go back to 2014 when Crest and South Point played each other in the 4th round to see who goes to the state championship. There was 14 or 13 weeks in between because that was the first game of the season for Crest. It was non-conference. So, all of these sidebars, all of these side plots fall into the playoffs, but it's like David said earlier, they're all 0-0 going into this Friday night.
All right, let's talk about Kings Mountain now. We're staying in the 3A, and they're at home at 8-2 against East Lincoln. And the guys, the East Lincoln Mustangs, that's one of the teams that if you're typically looking at strong teams from this half of the state, East Lincoln would fall into that category, Rob. This is not going to be an easy first-round matchup for Kings Mountain. And as a matter of fact, East Lincoln took Kings Mountain out last year in the playoffs.
Yeah, 2 years removed from a state championship. And to me, of the 4 county teams, Kings Mountain probably has the toughest draw in the first round. This is a high-powered offense out of East Lincoln. They're averaging about 40 a game. Probably the best offense that Kings Mountain has seen this year with what they do. I mean, they've thrown for about 2,300 yards, rushed for about 1,700 yards. I mean, this is a good offensive football team. They're going to be able to test Kings Mountain defense. The Kings Mountain secondary's got to be ready.
So I'm going to assume from what he's saying there, Coach, that the other side of the ball, maybe not the Mustangs' strength. Obviously, they would have gotten outscored in some of those games that they lost.
Obviously. And we know the offensive coordinator for East Lincoln has history here in Cleveland County in Matt Beam. But the point moving forward is East Lincoln is, that's playing into Kings Mountain's strength. And there are players on that team going back 2 years ago when that was the Western Finals that East Lincoln came into Kings Mountain beat them. Whether they were on the field or not, they were still there around the team because you figure they got pulled up at the end of the season. So there's some familiar people suiting up Friday night that remember being on that sideline or being in that game both ways. So it's going to be it's a tough bracket for Kings Mountain starting off.
Well, speaking of the bracket, there it is. Kings Mountain at a 13 hosting the 20 seed in East Lincoln. The winner of that game gets J.M. Robinson, Northeast Guilford winner. You got to expect that's J.M. Robinson as the 4 seed. And then on the other half of the bracket, some teams that you are familiar with. Greensboro Dudley at the 5 seed, A.C. Reynolds a 12 seed. Listen, A.C. Reynolds finished the season 5-4. They are not a very strong record-wise 12 seed, Rob. But needless to say, we are familiar with them and know what they do come playoff time.
I understand the game with Irwin really hurt them. They dealt with some injuries. I think the running back who'd been playing quarterback, Max Guest, went out injured late in that game. So they had some things come up. Interesting game for me would be Kings Mountain and Robinson. If they get to the second round, you talk about a defensive battle.
Phew.
Those 2 teams, that could if you like hard-hitting football, that Kings Mountain Jane Robinson game would definitely fall in that category.
It's right behind the Speedway. It's right behind the backstretch on the Speedway. If you go to Charlotte Motor Speedway, you can see their stadium lights right behind it. So it's we played them several years, or Crest played them several years ago, and I remember asking her AD, I said, how do you guys even go to school during speed weeks when they used to do that in May? And he said, we don't. It's deafening. Plus they need some of the students to work. But with that being said, yes, a defensive battle, an old-timey slobber knocker would be at J.M. Robinson on that Friday night.
All right, so that's a look at the 3A playoff brackets. When we come back, we'll talk about Shelby and Burns and the 2A side, and we'll do that next. You're watching Armchair Quarterback.
Cakes and cookies, toys and gifts, Christmas at your fingertips.
It's the shopping event of the season, the Southern Christmas Show, November 14th through 24th at the Park Expo and Conference Center. Celebrate the 12 days of Christmas, a countdown of Yuletide cheer brimming with festive decor and seasonal magic. Buy tickets at southernchristmasshow.com.
Let's go to the Southern Christmas Show.
Chef Paul Prudhomme once said, "You don't need a silver fork to eat good food." Well, on Cleveland County Kitchen, we don't have a silver fork, but we sure do serve up lots of good food. Hi, I'm Deborah Blanton. I hope you'll join me for the next Cleveland County Kitchen. Each month, we offer a complete farm-to-table experience. We visit local growers, we learn about nutrition, and wrap things up with wonderful meals prepared by our guest chefs. It's a lot of fun. I hope you'll join me for the next Cleveland County Kitchen.
Welcome back into Armchair Quarterback. I'm David Allen, joined as always by Coach Guy Suttle and Rob Root. Each week we talk about our teams in Cleveland County. We talked about the 3A side In the first segment, talking about Crest and Kings Mountain, what they expect this coming week in the playoffs and what they did last week in the kind of the makeup week from Hurricane Week. We'll talk about the 2As now. There's North Stanley, 6-4 on the season, at Burns, 7-3. So again, all 4 Cleveland County teams getting home games to start the playoffs, and then we'll just have to see how it goes from there. But North Stanley at Burns. Rob, what can we expect about North Stanley?
The 3 running backs, better than 350 yards total as a team. Shaver, the quarterback's thrown for about 1,200. But again, you start digging inside the numbers and see who they've done that against, and you think Burns has got a really good chance. I think it's one of those days where Burns can line up. When we talk about their running game, I think they can definitely take advantage of some things against North Surrey, and I think the Burns defense will be too athletic for them to have to deal with the Bulldogs.
Well, Guy, we talk about Burns kind of being one-dimensional, but in the Shelby game, what we saw is that when they needed to throw the ball, they didn't have too much trouble. They were able to throw it. They converted some big plays, scored some touchdowns through the air. Mm-hmm. So although it's not their primary focus on the offensive side, obviously the running game is, they are able to move the ball through the air when necessary.
Yeah, and not taking anything away from their throwing game. I think Shelby's probably went into that game, stopped the run, make them beat you with the pass. And that may have opened up the pass a little bit more. I think the thing that North Stanley's going to battle is the physical part of it with Burns. Looking at the schedule that they have played in 6-4, they're not as physical. And I know that Shelby and Burns both had, if people look at their records, there's probably an armchair quarterback somewhere else that's saying, well, look what they did. They played a bunch of 1A schools that they beat the fool out of. True, but they also played some very good in-county teams and some non-conference games that were very strong. But I think Burns is just going to be way too much physical with North Stanley.
All right, let's see that side of the bracket. You see Burns up there in the second row as they will take on North Stanley. The winner there goes to probably number 3, Monroe. Obviously, we think Monroe is going to be the winner there and heavily favored against T.W. Andrews. Then down there on the bottom side, you see East Surrey and Southwest Randolph and West Oaks and North Forsyth. Possible third-round matchups if the Bulldogs could get past North Stanley and then go to number 3, Monroe. But I'm going to tell you what, that's a tough second-round matchup, Rob, for the Bulldogs. If they do get out of the first round, I mean, hello, here's number 3 seed.
Yeah, and really, I think Monroe probably is the number 3 team in 2A behind Reidsville and Shelby. So that's going to be a tough game for Burns to have to go and win again. I think have to take that same mindset they had against Shelby, be really physical up front, run the football. We'll hopefully get a chance to break that game down and see those 2 teams play.
Absolutely.
In the playoffs, we really get into overall team speed. Mm-hmm. And that is sometimes the difference maker. Unless you have that dominant offensive line or that really dominant defensive line where you can slow some teams down. And even those dominant defensive front lines, you can get beat over the top. But overall team speed, it's so difficult to match up with overall team speed. And that's where I think Monroe may have an advantage. And I know we're looking down the road, but that may be something that Burns will have to deal with, is the overall team speed of a highly skilled Monroe High School.
All right, let's talk about the next one is Eden Moorhead, 2-8 at Shelby, 8-2. Doesn't bode well for Eden Moorhead. 2 wins, being in the playoffs, number 1, and then they got to come to Shelby, number 2.
Yeah, congratulations. This is basically another conference game for Shelby, what they ended with there in the middle of the season. But I think they used 4 different quarterbacks, and not like one quarterback started a game, like 4 quarterbacks in 10 games. They've started in every game. And the leader had like 130 yards total passing. Their top running back has 371 total yards for the entire season. This is going to get ugly quick, I think, kind of like what we saw some conference games. The only thing could have a little bit of a rootness in this game is I'm related to the Moorheads out of that part of the state. So, hey, maybe some family ties there. don't bring that stuff to Cleveland County. It's going to get bad.
Coach, I did see, though, that they had about 4 different teams back out of the chance to play Reidsville, which is the number 1 seed in the 2A, before RS Central finally said, yeah, we'll go to the playoffs. We'll go to Reidsville. We'll take, a beating on round 1.
Well, and whether it's RS Central or whether it's Eden Moorhead, the best part about this Friday night for Eden Moorhead is going to be the pregame meal. Okay, hopefully they'll get on a charter bus and they'll get to eat someplace nice and really fill up. But it's just, and as an athletic director, these are the games that drive the Shelby athletic director, who is actually, Will Banks is going to be the head football coach and the athletic director. It drives you nuts because at some point in time, you could actually lose money. If they bring 20 people, because it's over 50 miles, they get additional pay. Because of the pregame meal, they get additional pay. So, it could very easily be that the check going back to, and this as a former principal, the check going back to the visiting team is greater than what you get to deposit in the bank.
Yeah, we definitely had that situation several years ago, so I definitely know what you're talking about. Here's the bracket breakdown you see there. Shelby, number 2 against Moorhead. They would get the winner of Lincolnton and Maiden. That is a backyard battle right there between those two. It's a 15-18. That's about as close as it gets as far as the brackets are concerned. Then you see up on the other side, you got a number 7 Mount Pleasant against West Lincoln and the Community School of Davidson against Bandy's. All of those games, obviously, or those would be pertinent to possibly the 3rd round matchup if Shelby were to beat Moorhead and then beat the winner of Maiden and Lincolnton.
The Lincolnton Maiden game is interesting in that Lincolnton's already played Maiden and Lincolnton beat Maiden, and I'm pretty sure it was at Maiden. So that's going to be an interesting matchup right there, in that it's very close in that they're only about 8 miles apart.
Right.
So it's going to be a really interesting 2nd round to see who survives the 1st round to come into Shelby. Oh boy, now you get to go to Shelby.
And it would not surprise me to see West Lincoln and Bandy's both win their games as lower seeds, and they play in the 2nd round.
Oh yeah.
Would not surprise
And
me
they're
at
in
all.
the same conference also.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Definitely it'll be fun to watch. Tim's got the graphic for us. So there they are. North Stanley at Burns, Eastern Guilford at Crest, East Lincoln at Kings Mountain, and Eden Moorhead at Shelby. Again, round 1 of the state playoffs, and all 4 teams are at home on Friday night. Hopefully it's going to be good, cool, November weather. That's what it ought to be. So let's see. Let's have good crowds out there for all of them, because like Coach said, you're talking about, not just Shelby losing money. All 4 teams could be in the process of losing some money Friday night if we don't have good crowds. So let's have a good crowd for each of the 4 schools and support Cleveland County football. And we'll talk more about that next week. All right, we messed around and got 5 minutes to go. We still got all of college football and all of pro football to talk about, but let's just mention Gardner-Webb real quick. Got another win this weekend, so nice job. Tennessee Tech, is that who we said?
I think that's it.
Or Tennessee State, somebody in Tennessee.
We know
I
it's
think.
not technically. We know it's not Tennessee. It's
No,
just one of
that's
the
true.
others.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nor is it Vanderbilt.
So needless to say, good luck to the Bulldogs as they go this weekend. A couple of upsets this past weekend. Obviously, the biggest one was Ole Miss beating Georgia. The SEC is now just completely up in the air,
Yes.
Rob. Who's going to end up winning the SEC?
I still think Texas may be the team to take care of all of that, but so many scenarios now. We was talking before we come on, you could end up with 4 teams, maybe with 2 losses, and how do you decide who plays in the championship game? So it's going to be interesting. That huge game, that Tennessee-Georgia game, is a monster game this week.
Well, I'm still hanging with the Indiana Hoosiers. They improved to 10-0. They finally beat a named team, even though Michigan's down this year. And I didn't see the poll today, but they got to be pretty close to the top 5 or 6 at this point. They were number 8, and they won. So
Now, do they go to the Horseshoe this weekend?
I,
They've got to play Ohio State at some point in time.
Yep.
And to me, that is the true test.
Oh, yeah.
And we'll find out right there. But I'm like you. It's good for college football to see this happening right now.
Georgia Tech, why not? They just go ahead and stun Miami. Everybody thought it was a fluke when they beat Florida State in Dublin to start the season, and all that showed was Florida State is terrible. but now they beat Miami too, and now that really throws the ACC in a mess.
And then the thing is now, it's possible the ACC definitely one team in that 12 for the playoff, and if Miami loses to SMU in the ACC championship, then it definitely would just be them. It's a lot to shake out there with ACC as well, and I got to say congratulations to the Duke Blue Devils. They take care of Wake in 2 weeks, and they're the North Carolina State champions.
Oh, well, there you go. You got, I mean, that's kind of like RS Central, but they got the Rutherford County Championship like 3 times in 60 years, so we'll be excited for that.
There you go.
I'm just kidding, Rob. You know I got to get every chance I can on that Duke Carolina stuff. All right, let's talk about the NFL right quick. Carolina Panthers on TV early yesterday. I was at church, forgot all about it. And lo and behold, they go to overtime and beat the Giants in Germany, of all places, Coach.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the highlights, we wouldn't believe it at all. And that is 2 in a row, which is the first time for Bryce Young and his short pro career of having back-to-back wins. So, we can't. It's refreshing, I guess. But what are they doing other than hurting their draft pick?
My thought was I already said apologize to the people of Germany for making them watch that game. Then we forced them to watch it in overtime. So we definitely need to apologize to the German government and the citizens of Germany that they were forced to sit through that Sunday.
Well, I don't know what's going to be the final call on Bryce Young, whether he is the quarterback of the future for the Carolina Panthers or not. But I think that it's at least positive that the Dan Morgan and the powers that be are getting to see him outside of those first 2 games before he got benched, and now he's back, and they've won a couple. So, I mean, if that ends up costing them a couple rounds, or not a couple rounds, but a couple of picks down the line.
Well, even if nothing else, even if they decide he's still not their guy, they've got some film for other teams, and other teams are going to say, "Hey, let's take a shot at him."
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. A couple of other games that I thought were extremely interesting. The Chiefs were on the ropes, should have lost. They line up to kick a 30-something yard field goal for Denver to win that game, and all of a sudden, the special teams becomes a play, and they block the kick, and the Chiefs survive. They're 9-0, Coach. And the other one, Detroit, Jared Goff threw 5 interceptions in the first half, and then somehow or another, they kick a field goal at the buzzer to beat Houston last night.
Yeah, it's the NFL, and it's just crazy that it happens and the way it happens, and you're never out. But 5 interceptions in the NFL, and you still win. I mean, that's mind-boggling to me, because we talk about 5 interceptions in college.
sounds like a Duke football game.
Yeah, right. And
Well, it reminded me of John Craven at Gardner Webb. He threw 9 interceptions against Concord in '92 in the semifinals, and Gardner Webb still won the football game.
so it's the NFL. You never know what's going to happen, and you're never out of it, regardless of what's happened all the way up until that point. Who would have ever thought Dallas would be in the situation that they're in right now? We talk about Florida State, and there's just teams out there, whether it's high school, college, pro, that we just didn't see it coming.
Well, it's been interesting. It will continue to be interesting. Listen, we're only about halfway through the NFL season. There's a long way to go. I think 7 games remain on the schedule. So a lot that can happen between now and the playoffs in the NFL. So stay tuned. It's exciting. We're out of time. We'll see you next week right here on Armchair Quarterback.